Hi everybody, welcome back. We are looking at Jeremy Duff, Elements of New Testament Greek. We're in chapter 11, and I want to add a small note to the previous video on the subject of the second aorist. I want in particular to give you a few tips for remembering the form of the second aorist indicative in these verbs that have unusual endings in the second aorist, ginosko and katabino. You want to go back and look at the previous couple of videos to get an introduction to second aorists if you don't know what I'm talking about. But this is where we're going to look at today, katabino and ginosko. So first up, let's just notice what at least is reasonably sane about these verbs. So katabino, at least it's doing the sensible thing by putting the epsilon augment at the beginning of the stem, and then the alpha from the kata, the prefix preposition, elide, so it goes to kate, and then you've got the stem remaining, the b. Now technically it's possible to, it's just a side note, some grammarians prefer to think of the air, the vowel here, as part of the stem as well. That might actually technically be right if you are analysing things in the way that traditionally they have been analysed. However, I prefer to identify the vowel as part of the ending because that allows you more consistently to articulate what the endings are throughout the conjugation of a verb. Otherwise, because in lots of verb conjugations that vowel changes, and if you think that's part of the stem, you're going to have to be telling yourself the stem changes the whole time, and that seems to defeat the point of distinguishing the stem from the ending. So I think this is a more helpful way of doing it. I'm not the only one to think that. Anyway, that aside, now over katabino, you get this does sensible things, the beta remains. Now what happens with the endings? Well, you just read Duff and you think, okay, I just need to learn this stuff. But you know me well enough by now. You know, I like to try and find, is there some sort of logic in this? And the logic I've found in it is, as Duff says, the ending is dominated by the long vowel that forms part of the word itself, bear, but it is shaped so it's a little bit like a mixture between the present and imperfect endings. Just look with me. Imagine the verb luo. You've got luo, luace, luae, luomen, luete, luusin. Well, if you think of those, put that one in as well. If you think of those endings, these aren't so dissimilar from them. If you're willing to say, well, we just get rid of the vowels here and replace them with the vowel that dominates in kataben, the airta. You see, the ace has gone to air, the a has gone to air, the omen has gone to airmen, and so on. So there's some kind of logic in that. They're a little bit like the present endings. Apart from this one, because the n is like, well, it's not like o, is it? Well, it kind of is a bit like the imperfect ending, eluon, elues, eluen, eluomen, eluete, eluon. And of course there is some overlap between the imperfect endings and the present endings. Eluon, elus, eluen, well, that's a bit different. Eluomen, that's the same, eluete, eluon. There is some similarity. So, just as a hint, if you think of katabino in the aorist as being dominated by this aorta and then being similar to the endings in the present and a bit of the imperfect, then you should at least be able to reverse engineer it eventually if you're sitting with the text in front of you and you're trying to figure out what on earth does this mean. Now the same kind of thing happens with ginosko in the aorist. You've got the epsilon augment. Okay, well that's sane at least. The gn is all that's left of the stem, and okay, well that's just what you have to remember. But you know that gn means something to do with knowledge, gn, because of the word gnostic. And if you're studying New Testament Greek, you ought to be studying New Testament theology as well. Therefore, you'll know something about what a gnostic is, gnostic. And again, what you've got is the principle of the ending being dominated by this vowel, the omega, and then the rest of these endings follows pretty much, in fact exactly, as you look at it, the same pattern as in katabino. ace, a, omen, ete, usin. Just the vowel, men, te, san. It's not altogether impossible to imagine how that has arisen over time, and therefore it's not altogether impossible to reverse engineer it. You can find similar patterns, though they're a little bit harder to discern, in the endings for the verb in the other moods, and they're right there on page 128. I'm afraid there aren't patterns which are so helpful, so I'm not going to just write them up here. They're in the book, you can have a look at them. But that will probably do for all of us for now. Oh, with one exception, yes. At the bottom of that section, middle of page 128, Duff points out that some second aorists have first aorist endings sometimes, particularly elphon, apon, adon, and enenkon. Well, the great thing about that is that you'll spot that as long as you've spotted the stem. If you just spot the stem is second aorist, and then you remember, well, sometimes, instead of having changed stem imperfect endings, or changed stem present endings, it will have changed stem aorist endings. If you're just aware of that possibility, it won't throw you too much. Okay, that brings us to the halfway point of this chapter. Well done for getting this far. We've done the second aorist. That's it now. We won't hear from them again, except they'll keep popping up in the Greek of the New Testament. But we're not going to have to learn anything new about them. We're going to crack on next with section 11.2, the future and the aorist of what are called liquid verbs. That's nowhere near as complicated as the second aorist. Don't worry about it. It's going to be much easier, I promise. But that'll do for now. Remember, 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, 5-6 days a week. And we'll have you reading this stuff in no time at all. God bless, and bye for now.